Imagine a decade when Saturday mornings were filled with strange heroes and dangerous humor. The 90s pushed cartoons into bold new territories where violence, absurdity, and moral chaos danced together. But many of those shows could never air today. They were too weird, too wild, or too honest for modern television. These are 20 more forgotten 90s cartoons buried by controversy and nostalgia. Let us begin. Number 20. The Brothers Grunt, 1994. Few remember MTV's grotesque experiment known as the Brothers Grunt. It was meant to follow the network's success with Beavis and Butt-Head, but it crossed even stranger lines. The series centered on pale, misshapen creatures who searched for a lost brother in a surreal world of grime and fluids. Each episode felt like an animated fever dream, filled with disturbing visuals and guttural noises rather than jokes. Parents complained that the show looked like a nightmare instead of comedy. Critics called it unbearable. Some stations pulled episodes after viewer complaints about its body horror themes and indecent imagery. MTV defended it as art for a few months, but quietly canceled it when ratings collapsed. Behind the scenes, animators later revealed that production was chaotic. The creator wanted to push boundaries of disgust animation to test how far the medium could go. That experiment backfired when audiences tuned out. Today, the Brothers Grunt survives only in bootleg recordings and online archives. It stands as a reminder of how the early 90s dared to offend rather than entertain. It may be forgotten, but it marked the point when MTV animation became a place of risk rather than laughter. Number 19. Freakazoid, 1995. When Steven Spielberg produced Freakazoid, he wanted a superhero parody that captured the energy of Looney Tunes for the modern age. What emerged was chaos. Freakazoid followed Dexter Douglas, a computer nerd who transformed into a manic blue superhero with absurd powers and zero restraint. The humor was rapid meta and often unhinged, breaking the fourth wall before Deadpool ever did. But Freakazoid confused parents and networks alike. Its jokes mocked authority, mocked media, and mocked itself. Some episodes featured parodies of government surveillance or strange horror segments that frightened younger viewers. Network censors often clashed with the writing team over what counted as family-friendly. Despite critical praise and a devoted cult, following the ratings never matched other kids' WB hits. The show's surreal tone alienated advertisers and executives who did not understand its satire. Behind the scenes, Spielberg's production team battled scheduling chaos and constant interference. Writers said the studio wanted to tone down the insanity that defined its charm. When cancellation came after 2 seasons, fans were heartbroken. Decades later, Freakazoid is remembered as lightning in a bottle, too smart, too silly, and too strange for mainstream acceptance. Its legacy lives in every self-aware cartoon that followed. Number 18. Duckman, 1994. Duckman was not just a cartoon. It was an adult outcry disguised as a talking duck detective. Voiced by Jason Alexander, this cynical private eye solved absurd crimes while ranting about society's hypocrisy. The humor was sharp political and deeply offensive by modern standards. The show aired on USA Network alongside edgy fare, but it constantly drew complaints for mocking religion, gender, and morality. Some episodes were pulled or re-edited after outrage from conservative groups who claimed it corrupted viewers. Behind the curtain, writers recall battles with censors almost every week. The show's creator, Everett Peck, defended it as satire on American decay. Animators described 16-hour days and endless rewrites because the network could not decide whether Duckman was for adults or teenagers. By the late 90s, the show faded quietly as new executives replaced it with safer content. Yet Duckman predicted the anti-hero trend years before it became television gold. Its emotional depth hidden under sleaze made it more human than many live-action dramas. Today, Duckman remains a relic of raw, creative freedom. It dared to insult everyone in order to reflect them. In a world obsessed with polish, it reminds us how valuable chaos once was. Number 17. The Head, 1994. In the mid-90s, MTV decided to build a late-night animation block called Liquid Television, and within it emerged The Head. It was the story of a shy young man named Jim who one day woke up with an enormous alien head growing out of his own. Inside lived a creature named Roy, who used Jim's body to fight off other extraterrestrial invaders. The premise was equal parts horror and absurd comedy. The animation was gritty, the colors muted, and the atmosphere unlike anything on television. It explored paranoia, mental illness, and government conspiracy through grotesque humor. Critics called it bold, but audiences found it deeply unsettling. Parents wrote to networks calling it too disturbing for young viewers. The censorship boards hated it. Certain scenes involving body transformation and psychological breakdowns were edited for reruns. MTV's legal department worried that it was too violent and too nihilistic for even its late-night slot. Behind the scenes, production was done on a shoestring budget. Animators described working with experimental visual techniques and minimal studio oversight. The freedom allowed brilliance but also chaos. After 2 short seasons, The Head was quietly buried and forgotten. Today, it stands as one of the strangest creative risks ever aired. In an era where everything is polished and safe, The Head feels like a warning from a time when cartoons dared to terrify rather than comfort. Number 16. Mission Hill, 1999. Mission Hill was supposed to be the next great adult animated sitcom. Created by 2 former Simpsons writers, it followed 2 brothers living in a fictional bohemian city filled with artists, misfits, and dreamers. Its humor was dry, its style indie, and its heart genuine. But audiences were not ready. The show depicted social issues like unemployment, gentrification, and generational divides. It mocked the corporate world and hinted at relationships and lifestyles that conservative networks considered taboo. Executives panicked. Only a handful of episodes aired before it was pulled from prime time. Censors demanded rewrites for jokes that were deemed too mature or subversive. Some advertisers threatened to withdraw if the tone was not softened. The creators later revealed that they received constant memos asking them to make the characters more normal and the setting less grimy. Behind the scenes, animators struggled to keep morale as the production was moved between networks. Eventually, Cartoon Network's Adult Swim revived it briefly, but by then the audience had vanished. Today, Mission Hill is regarded as a cult classic. Fans who discover it decades later are stunned by how modern its ideas feel. It captured the late 90s tension between rebellion and conformity. A voice of youth, silenced too early. Number 15. The Maxx, 1995. The Maxx was unlike any superhero cartoon before it. Adapted from Sam Keith's surreal comic, it told the story of a homeless man who believed he was a protector of a fantasy world called the Outback. He fought monsters both real and psychological while befriending a social worker haunted by trauma. The storytelling was fragmented, poetic, and drenched in existential pain. It was closer to art house cinema than animation. Audiences expecting action found instead a meditation on reality, identity, and suffering. Censors could not handle it. Scenes dealing with mental collapse and violence were heavily trimmed. MTV executives worried the show was too dark, even for adults. It aired late at night with minimal promotion and soon disappeared. Behind the curtain, the production team worked in isolation. The animation was hand-painted, the voice acting subtle, and the tone intentionally dreamlike. Every episode felt like a confession from a wounded soul. But that honesty doomed it in a culture obsessed with light entertainment. Today, the Maxx is revered among artists as a masterpiece lost in time. It showed that animation could explore the human mind without apology. Forgotten by the masses but remembered by visionaries, it remains proof that beauty can be unsettling. Number 14. Space Ghost, Coast to Coast, 1994. Before adult animation became mainstream, Space Ghost Coast to Coast rewrote the rules. It took an old Hanna-Barbera superhero and turned him into an absurd talk show host who interviewed real celebrities while insulting them. The humor was deadpan surreal and self-aware. It was the birth of postmodern animation long before audiences even had a name for it. Viewers at first thought it was a prank. How could a children's hero host a show full of awkward silences, bizarre editing, and mocking sarcasm? Some stations refused to air certain episodes, claiming they mocked guests or confused audiences. The mix of live-action interviews and retro cartoon footage felt too strange for traditional television. Censors had no idea how to classify it. Was it parody? Was it adult comedy? Was it performance art? Producers fought to keep its weirdness intact despite constant studio confusion. Cartoon Network executives nearly canceled it several times, fearing advertisers would flee. Behind the scenes, the writers thrived on chaos. They recorded unscripted interviews, then edited them into bizarre conversations. Voice actors often improvised entire scenes. That unpredictability became its charm. The show inspired an entire generation of animators who would later create Adult Swim icons. But in the 90s, it was dismissed as nonsense. Today, Space Ghost Coast to Coast stands as the ancestor of surreal comedy, a relic of creative freedom that could never exist under today's corporate control. Number 13. Aeon Flux, 1991. Aeon Flux was unlike any cartoon that came before it. Born from MTV's Liquid Television, it was a wordless, violent, and sensual dystopian vision set in a future ruled by spies, assassins, and corrupt governments. The animation style was angular and nightmarish. Its protagonist, Aeon, was an anti-hero who died repeatedly in almost every short film. Audiences were shocked by its tone. There was no moral message, no happy ending. Critics described it as disturbing and hypnotic. Censors hated it for its violence and imagery. Entire episodes were pulled in certain markets for being too graphic or confusing. MTV executives struggled to explain it to advertisers. How do you sell a show that feels like a dream and a nightmare at once? Behind the scenes, creator Peter Chung refused to simplify his vision. He said the series was meant to provoke thought, not comfort. The production team faced constant pressure to tone it down, but refused. Eventually, Aeon Flux ended abruptly, leaving audiences dazed. Yet its influence spread quietly across film and animation. Modern shows about dystopia and identity owe it a silent debt. Today, Aeon Flux feels like a transmission from another planet. Its images remain haunting because they remind us of a time when networks were brave enough to confuse their audience. Number 12. Clerks, the Animated Series, 1999. When Kevin Smith turned his cult movie Clerks into a cartoon, it seemed like a natural fit. But the result became one of the most misunderstood shows of the decade. Airing on ABC, the series followed two cynical convenience store clerks trapped in absurd adventures that mocked pop culture itself. The humor was meta-sarcastic and self-destructive. In one episode, the characters mocked their own network for airing them out of order. That boldness enraged ABC executives. Only 2 episodes aired before the series was pulled without warning. Behind the scenes, Kevin Smith fought to keep the humor intact. The network demanded rewrites that stripped away the satire and added moral lessons. The creators refused. When advertisers threatened to pull out, the show was quietly buried. Fans later discovered the unaired episodes on DVD and hailed them as genius. Critics who once dismissed the show later called it ahead of its time. It predicted the sarcastic tone that would define adult animation in the next decade. Today, Clerks, the animated series, remains a cautionary tale about what happens when mainstream television tries to cage rebellion. Its humor burned bright, but far too briefly, leaving behind only cult memories of what could have been. Number 11. The Critic, 1994. The Critic was meant to be the thinking person's cartoon. Created by writers from The Simpsons, it starred Jay Sherman, a weary film reviewer whose catchphrase, "It stinks," became iconic. The show skewered Hollywood egos, bad movies, and shallow fame. It was sharp funny and painfully self-aware. But that honesty became its downfall. Television executives wanted a softer, more lovable hero, but Jay was bitter cynical and often depressed. Critics adored the show, but mainstream viewers did not. Ratings slipped, and ABC panicked. They demanded friendlier storylines and less satire aimed at the entertainment industry that funded them. When the second season moved to Fox, things worsened. Schedules shifted, promotion vanished, and censorship increased. Jokes about corporate greed and political hypocrisy were cut or rewritten. The writers rebelled, but the damage was done. Behind the scenes, voice actor Jon Lovitz later said the show was too smart for television. Writers worked tirelessly crafting cultural references that would fly over most heads. It was a show built for an audience that did not yet exist. Today, The Critic is remembered as prophetic. Its mockery of remakes, sequels, and shallow critics predicted the modern media landscape perfectly. Yet its tragedy remains that truth often dies in the shadow of commerce. Number 10. The Oblongs, 1999. The Oblongs was grotesque, absurd, and far too dark for its own good. It followed a family of mutants living in a valley poisoned by pollution while the wealthy elite lived above them, untouched. The father had no arms or legs. The children suffered deformities caused by toxic waste. Beneath its humor lay biting social commentary on class inequality and environmental ruin. Viewers were divided. Some praised its satire, while others found it cruel and depressing. Networks grew nervous about complaints that it mocked disability and poverty. WB eventually canceled it after only 13 episodes. Advertisers refused to be associated with what they called disturbing humor. Behind the scenes, animators revealed that censorship battles raged daily. Jokes were rewritten, entire scenes removed. Writers argued that the grotesque visuals were metaphorical, not offensive, but executives would not listen. Adult Swim later revived it for reruns where it found a cult audience. Fans admired its boldness and honesty hidden behind freakish imagery. It was a mirror to society, too unflattering to survive. Today, The Oblongs is both tragedy and triumph, a forgotten gem that proved cartoons could attack injustice better than any documentary. Its laughter came from pain, and that made it unforgettable. Number 9. Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist, 1995. Dr. Katz was a quiet revolution disguised as a cartoon. Using crude, squiggly animation, it followed a soft-spoken therapist who counseled neurotic comedians and oddball clients. Most of the dialogue was improvised, giving it a loose conversational style unseen on television. Audiences expecting slapstick were confused. The humor was subtle, awkward, and slow. Some networks complained it was not exciting enough for animation. But behind its simplicity lay brilliance. Each episode captured human insecurity through hesitant speech and silence. Censors did not know what to make of it. The lack of action made it impossible to categorize. It was too adult for kids, too gentle for late night. Comedy Central supported it for years, but executives constantly questioned its appeal. Behind the curtain, the small animation team worked tirelessly. Voice actors recorded natural conversations without scripts, forcing animators to match unpredictable timing. It was an artistic nightmare that produced beautiful realism. Though the show ended quietly, its influence spread everywhere. Later hits like Bob's Burgers and Home Movies borrowed its tone and technique. Dr. Katz proved that animation could explore humanity without spectacle. Today, it stands as one of the bravest experiments in television history. Forgotten by many yet embedded in the DNA of modern comedy, it whispered truths that loud shows never could. Number 8. Courage the Cowardly Dog, 1999. Courage. The Cowardly Dog was one of the strangest and most haunting cartoons ever made for children. It followed a timid pink dog living with an elderly couple in the middle of nowhere, a literal void surrounded by cosmic horrors. Every episode plunged viewers into surreal nightmares, blending humor, tragedy, and genuine terror. Its creator, John Dilworth, wanted to explore fear as art. But television networks did not understand it. Parents complained that it was too frightening for children and too weird for adults. The monsters were not simple villains. They were metaphors for trauma, loneliness, and death. Episodes like The Tower of Dr. Zalost and King Ramses' Curse left lasting psychological scars on young audiences. Censors tried to tone it down, but Dilworth fought back. He argued that fear was an essential part of growing up. The production team used distorted sound design, minimalist music, and grotesque computer graphics to evoke dread. Each episode was like a twisted fable that refused to comfort the viewer. Behind the scenes, the show's budget was small and deadlines brutal. Animators worked late nights blending hand-drawn frames with experimental digital effects. Voice actor Marty Grabstein recorded Courage's panicked screams for hours at a time, describing the process as emotionally draining. When it finally ended in the early 2000s, Cartoon Network quietly retired reruns after rising complaints from parents' groups. But the show never truly died. Fans revived it online, calling it art disguised as madness. Today, Courage stands as a monument to fearless creativity. It dared to show that love and terror could share the same heartbeat, a masterpiece that would never survive the safety of modern programming. Number 7. Ren and Stimpy. Adult Party Cartoon, 1993, original run revived in 2003. Ren and Stimpy had already shocked the early 90s with its grotesque humor and boundary-pushing animation. But nothing prepared audiences for the revival series known as Adult Party Cartoon. Creator John Kricfalusi promised to make the show exactly as he had always intended, raw, anarchic, and entirely unfiltered. The result was chaos. The characters became monstrous parodies of themselves. The surreal slapstick turned darker, more psychological, and far more disturbing. Networks panicked almost immediately. Spike TV ordered 6 episodes, but pulled them after airing just 3. Viewers were horrified by the intensity and adult tone. Censors launched investigations into production ethics. Behind the curtain, animators described grueling schedules, erratic leadership, and studio interference. Kricfalusi's perfectionism clashed with everyone around him. Rumors spread of episodes so disturbing they were locked away permanently. Fans of the original show were divided. Some saw it as a bold artistic statement. Others saw it as a betrayal. Critics described it as a meltdown in animated form. Advertisers refused to sponsor it. When the revival collapsed, it took the creator's career with it. But its impact lingered. It forced the industry to confront how far freedom could go before imploding. Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon was a grotesque self-portrait of rebellion gone too far. Today, it remains one of the most controversial cartoons ever made, a nightmare that proved genius and madness are often the same thing. Number 6. Invader Zim, 1999. Invader Zim arrived at the end of the decade like a screaming transmission from another world. Created by comic artist Jonan Vasquez, it told the story of an alien who disguised himself as a human child to conquer Earth, but was too incompetent to succeed. The show was drenched in dark humor, grotesque imagery, and existential despair, hidden beneath manic laughter. Nickelodeon executives thought they were buying another quirky sci-fi comedy. What they got was a cosmic horror disguised as children's television. The show mocked humanity, technology, and the emptiness of suburban life. Episodes featured dismembered robots, decaying meat, and surreal nightmares that slipped past censors because no one understood them. Parents' groups soon noticed. Complaints flooded in about violent imagery, disturbing themes, and cynical tone. Some affiliates refused to air episodes altogether. Nickelodeon panicked, pulling it after barely 2 seasons. Behind the scenes, Vasquez and his team worked like mad scientists. The production used experimental lighting techniques and cinematic camera angles rarely seen in animation. The writing staff clashed constantly with executives demanding softer humor. Vasquez refused. He said he wanted to make a show for strange kids who felt misunderstood. The result was cancellation, but immortality. Years later, Invader Zim returned as a cult phenomenon, worshipped by fans who saw beauty in its chaos. It influenced an entire generation of animators from Adventure Time to Rick and Morty. Invader Zim proved that brilliance often looks like madness to those who fear risk. It was television that stared into the void and laughed back. Today, it stands as one of the last true rebellions of the 90s, a show too dark, too smart, and too honest to survive the modern filter. Number 5. Beavis and Butt-Head, 1993. Few shows terrified parents and delighted teenagers the way Beavis and Butt-Head did. When it premiered on MTV, it felt like a cultural explosion, a crude yet brutally honest reflection of bored youth trapped in a wasteland of television noise and corporate garbage. 2 dim-witted teens obsessed with heavy metal fast food and destruction became accidental prophets of the 90s. The show was raw, animated chaos. Beavis and Butt-Head sat on their filthy couch, laughing at music videos while misinterpreting the world around them. They vandalized property, mocked authority, and lived by the gospel of stupidity. Critics called it the death of intelligence. Parents called it the end of civilization. But young audiences recognized the satire hidden beneath the filth. Controversy came fast and loud. In 1993, a tragic incident involving a child and fire led news outlets to blame the show. MTV panicked. They moved it to a late-night slot, censored violent scenes, and removed all references to fire. Politicians demanded it be banned. Executives debated canceling it entirely. Behind the scenes, creator Mike Judge fought for artistic freedom. He insisted that the show was a mirror reflecting America's numbness, not a guidebook for chaos. His team of animators worked in a small Texas studio surrounded by late nights and low pay. Every episode was produced under protest letters and threats. Eventually, MTV realized the controversy only made it more famous. Beavis and Butt-Head became a phenomenon spawning merchandise, music albums, and a hit movie. Yet the backlash never faded. Today, the show is remembered as a time capsule of rebellion when stupidity was used to expose cultural decay. It was loud, offensive, and brilliant, proof that sometimes the lowest humor hides the highest truth. Number 4. Spawn. The animated series, 1997. HBO's Spawn was unlike any cartoon before it. Based on Todd McFarlane's dark comic, it followed a soldier betrayed and murdered who returned from hell to wage war on corruption and demons alike. It was not meant for children. It was grim, brutal, and unapologetically adult. The animation dripped with shadows and blood, the atmosphere thick with damnation. When it aired, critics were stunned. This was not superhero fiction. It was tragedy and theology combined. Spawn questioned redemption and evil, using animation as a weapon. Yet it quickly became one of the most controversial shows on television. Religious groups condemned it for blasphemy, while others accused it of glorifying violence. HBO refused to tone it down. Behind the scenes, McFarlane pushed for absolute creative control. The team worked in near darkness, creating gothic visuals that rivaled live-action cinema. Voice actor Keith David gave Spawn an operatic power that elevated the writing. But every episode faced scrutiny. Even HBO executives feared political backlash. In production, the tension was constant. Episodes were delayed because of protests from family organizations. Networks outside the United States refused to broadcast it. Animation guilds complained about its intensity and moral ambiguity. Despite it all, Spawn won an Emmy Award and became a cult masterpiece. Its influence can be seen in modern anti-hero shows like The Boys and Invincible. But even now, most networks would never allow such raw moral despair to reach screens again. Spawn proved that animation could be as deep and tragic as Shakespeare. And that is why it vanished, because truth in darkness frightens those who profit from light. Number 3. Gargoyles, 1994. Disney had always been known for fairy tales and heroes, but Gargoyles changed everything. It was the company's darkest animated series, a gothic saga about ancient stone creatures who awaken in modern New York to protect a world that fears them. With mythic writing, Shakespearean influences, and brooding visuals, it was unlike any other children's show. At first, audiences were mesmerized. The animation was cinematic, the music haunting. But beneath the surface were themes of betrayal, revenge, and existential pain. Each gargoyle represented a moral question about identity and loyalty. It was philosophy disguised as fantasy. Conservative groups immediately targeted it. They claimed it promoted occultism and violence. Some called for its ban, arguing that monsters should not be heroes. Disney faced mounting pressure from affiliates and parents who did not understand its tragic tone. Episodes dealing with death and prejudice were edited or pulled. Behind the IJMA scenes, the writers faced endless censorship notes. Producers described daily battles to keep storylines intact. They wanted complex, serialized storytelling, something rare for children's television, but executives demanded simpler plots. Ratings began to slip under corporate interference. After 2 powerful seasons, the creative team was replaced and the show's soul disappeared. The final season limped to its end, leaving fans heartbroken. Yet Gargoyles became immortal in a different way. It inspired a generation of fans who saw in its darkness a reflection of their own struggles. Today, it is celebrated as one of Disney's most daring experiments, a myth carved in stone that no modern studio would dare attempt again. Gargoyles taught that even monsters could be noble, a lesson too heavy for the networks that buried it. Number 2. Batman. The Animated Series, 1992. Batman. The animated series was not just a cartoon, it was a revolution in storytelling that changed television forever. When it premiered in the early 90s, audiences expected a simple superhero show. What they got was noir tragedy masked as animation, a city drenched in eternal night, and a hero drowning in guilt. Every frame was painted with darkness. The music echoed old Hollywood crime thrillers. The writing dealt with trauma, corruption, and moral ambiguity in ways that shocked censors. Children's shows were supposed to be colorful, but Batman was soaked in shadow and melancholy. Characters bled, characters broke down, and villains were portrayed as victims of society rather than monsters. Censors struggled constantly. Scenes with guns were trimmed. Death references were rewritten. The word kill was banned from the script, yet the show still radiated menace. Producers fought tooth and nail to keep its gothic tone. Voice director Andrea Romano assembled a cast of legends, including Kevin Conroy, whose deep, sorrowful voice defined Batman for generations, and Mark Hamill, whose Joker laughed like a symphony of insanity. Behind the scenes, the animation process was revolutionary. Artists painted backgrounds on black paper instead of white, creating that unforgettable depth of gloom. The network demanded lighter storylines, but creator Bruce Timm refused to compromise. Every episode was a short film exploring grief and justice. Despite all restrictions, Batman the Animated Series thrived and won Emmys, yet it was too sophisticated for children's television. Executives feared complaints and quietly shifted it to later time slots. Today, it is remembered not just as the best superhero cartoon ever made, but as the one that proved animation could tell stories as profound as cinema. In the era of safe entertainment, Batman the Animated Series remains the last shadow that refuses to fade. Number 1. The Simpsons. 1989 continuing through the 90s. Long before animation was respected, The Simpsons detonated a cultural bomb. When it arrived on television at the end of the 80s and dominated the 90s, it rewrote the language of satire. It was not a family show, it was a mirror reflecting greed, hypocrisy, and the absurdity of American life with such brutal honesty that entire generations grew up laughing at their own dysfunction. Every week it dared to mock sacred institutions, politicians, celebrities, religion corporations. No one was safe. Parents accused it of destroying family values. Schools banned Bart Simpson shirts, and politicians called it moral poison. But behind the laughter lay painful truth. It showed what families really looked like, flawed, weary, but somehow still surviving. Fox executives were terrified at first. Advertisers threatened to withdraw. Censors ordered entire scripts rewritten. The show's creators refused. They believed animation could speak harder truths than live action ever could. Episodes like Homer's Enemy and Mother Simpson tackled existential dread and social alienation beneath bright yellow colors. Behind the curtain, the production was a battlefield. Writers fought nightly over jokes. Animators pushed the limits of what could be shown. Guest stars from every corner of Hollywood wanted to appear, but controversy followed each broadcast. Religious leaders denounced it. Schools blamed it for juvenile behavior. Yet audiences could not look away. By the mid-90s, The Simpsons had transformed television into a new art form. Every modern animated series owes it a debt. It proved that satire could survive censorship through cleverness and courage. Even now, its early seasons remain too raw and too truthful to be remade. The Simpsons became the most dangerous cartoon of the decade precisely because it held up a mirror. And the world did not like what it saw. These forgotten 90s cartoons remind us of a lost era when animation dared to provoke rather than please. They were bold, reckless, and unfiltered, each a spark that modern screens could never contain. Which of these shows do you remember? Which ones deserve revival? Tell us below and keep the rebellion alive by liking, subscribing, and sharing the stories they tried to erase.